I shouldn't have felt it, but it was already too late. That's how my story began. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Because what's coming is something you definitely expected, but in the most unexpected form. My name is Anna, I'm 42, and I'm used to being in control of everything. My home, my work, my family. But that all changed the day he walked into my life. My stepson, a grown, confident man, and there was too much in his gaze that I shouldn't have noticed. The morning started calmly, as if everything was as usual. I woke up first, put the kettle on, and with a familiar motion, opened the window, letting the cool air into the kitchen. I could hear him tossing and turning in his room, not yet up. Fresh bread, cheese, and sliced vegetables were already on the table. Simple home-cooked food that I always prepared effortlessly, but with a kind of care I couldn't explain. A few minutes later, he walked in, sleepy, in a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair disheveled. "Good morning," he said, smiling a little too warmly. I nodded, trying to maintain the demeanor of a calm homemaker. We sat down for breakfast. The conversation was ordinary, about errands, what we needed to buy from the store, about him meeting friends that evening. But in those simple words there was something I was trying to ignore. His gaze lingered a little longer than it should, and his smile seemed to read my thoughts. I looked away, pretending to adjust my cup, and suddenly remembered I needed to water the plants. The day dragged on with ordinary tasks. I washed the dishes. He fixed a cabinet that had been squeaking for a while. Then we drove to the grocery store together. The radio played softly in the car. He was humming something to himself, and I watched out the window, trying not to show that every little thing was making me nervous. That evening, I was tidying up the kitchen when he came in, holding a plate of fruit. "You look tired," he said. "Let me help." His voice was nothing special, just ordinary concern. But I caught myself feeling that tension between us again. A tension that was impossible to ignore. The evening fell quietly, and the house seemed to slow its breathing. I was standing by the stove stirring the soup when he walked past and brushed my shoulder, too close for a simple pass. I pretended not to notice, but my heart beat faster. He took a glass of water, poured it slowly as if to stretch the moment, and sat down at the table, watching me from under his brow. We then ate in almost complete silence, with only the clinking of spoons against plates. Later, he turned on the TV, and I, having put away the dishes, sat down beside him, not knowing what to do with my hands. Some movie was on the screen, but I barely heard the dialogue, only feeling his knee gently touching mine. Second by second, it became a test. I got up, said I needed to check the laundry, and went to the bedroom. There, surrounded by the familiar scent of clean bedding, I tried to distract myself, but a minute later, the door creaked and he peeked in as if by accident. "You forgot to turn off the light," he said, but his eyes said something completely different. I felt that the tension was now impossible to hide. It had become a part of our daily life, of our simplest moments, and with each passing day, it weighed more heavily on both of us. He entered the room slowly, as if gauging my reaction. I was standing at the closet, rummaging through clothes, but I could feel his gaze on me. "You always find a reason to come in here," I said quietly, without turning around. He took a step closer, and a silence hung in the air, filled only with our breathing. I abruptly closed the closet door and turned to face him. Our eyes met, and it became hard for me to breathe. His gaze was persistent, almost daring, but there was also something soft in it, something that kept me from looking away. I took a step back, but he immediately closed the distance, so close that I could feel the warmth of his hand even though he hadn't touched me yet. At that moment, something outside banged, a neighbor's door, and I flinched. He stopped too, as if reality had pulled us both back. But the tension didn't disappear. It only grew stronger, lurking in the air, promising that something more awaited us. He made a show of stepping away but lingered just a foot away, as if testing whether I would let this closeness go. I turned to the window, trying to find some calm in the familiar little things. The mug on the sill, the quiet creak of the floorboards. But every detail seemed to intensify the tension. He came closer, so close that I heard the quiet snap of a floorboard under his foot. "You know yourself that I'm not here for nothing," he said in a low, almost a whisper. My heart raced, but I didn't move. Instead, I adjusted my hair to hide the tremor in my fingers and pretended I was more concerned with the open book on the table. But the book remained closed, and the reality was too clear. He stopped right beside me, so his shadow fell on my hand. The moment hung on a thin line between words and silence, between a step back and what was about to happen. I felt his hand brush my shoulder ever so slightly, as if by accident. But in that touch there was too much intent. The room grew silent, with only the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds, making each pause even longer. I didn't turn around, but I could feel his gaze on me, heavy, persistent, and hard to escape. "You were waiting for this too, weren't you?" he whispered, and the words seemed to vibrate in the air. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe more evenly, but my heart was betrayingly pounding, giving away everything I was trying to hide. Someone slammed a gate outside. The sound broke the tension, and I abruptly took a step back, pretending to look for something on a shelf. But that thin line had already been drawn between us, and it was easier to cross it than to go back. I felt him linger beside me longer than he should have, as if not daring to leave. His scent hung in the air, warm and familiar, and therefore even more dangerous. I bent down to the table, pretending to adjust the tablecloth, but my heart was still beating so loudly that I felt he could hear it too. He said quietly, "You know I can't look at this calmly," and his voice trembled with suppressed emotions. I took a step back, hitting the edge of the table, and he was too close, so close that the shadow of his face fell on mine. At that moment, any small sound, the kettle on the stove, the creak of floorboards in the next room, could have shattered the fragile balance, but nothing happened, and the silence grew heavier. He seemed to be searching for a reason for his silence but couldn't find one. His eyes gleamed in the dim light of the kitchen, making his gaze even more dangerous. I felt a thin, invisible thread stretch between us. All it would take was to reach out and everything would change. He took a step closer, and his breath brushed against my cheek. I instinctively closed my eyes, as if that would make it easier to hold on, but the silence only intensified the tension. The seconds stretched into an eternity, and I knew that in a moment, the boundary would disappear forever. He seemed frightened by his own action, stopping right beside me but not touching me. The silence became deafening. Every breath was too clear. I pretended to be busy with a cup, but my hands were shaking betrayingly. He ran his fingers along the countertop as if testing my patience and said quietly, "You shouldn't have closed your eyes. I can still see what you want." Those words burned more than any touch, and trying to look calm, I only replied, "You're mistaken." But deep down, I knew he understood everything without words. I turned away, pretending to look out the window, but my reflection in the glass gave it all away. My flushed cheeks, the trembling smile on my lips. He came closer. His steps were muffled, and the air seemed to grow heavier. I heard him hold his breath, his fingers touching the back of my chair, not daring to go further. My heart was pounding so loudly that it felt like he could hear it. "You still think you can run away?" His voice was low and confident. I bit my lip without turning to him, but inside I already knew it was too late to run. He took another step closer, and I felt his breath on my neck. A thin shiver ran down my skin. I pretended to be busy, straightening the books on the table, but my fingers were shaking betrayingly. "You know all this is pointless," he said quietly, almost in a whisper, and his hand rested on the edge of the table, blocking my escape. I turned my head and our gazes met. In that moment it became clear. There were no boundaries or rules left between us, only tension that grew stronger with every second. His hand shifted slightly. His fingers almost touched my palm, and I automatically stepped back, but he closed the distance again. A silence hung in the room. Only the ticking of the clock on a shelf reminded me that time was passing. I felt my heart beating too fast, my breathing growing heavier. "You know I won't be able to stop, don't you?" he whispered, and his voice held a resolve I had long feared. My back hit the wall, and there was no escape from that moment. Only him and his gaze, which held me tighter than any hands. He took a step closer, and I felt the warmth of his body engulf me without even touching me. His breath brushed my cheek, and a shiver ran down my skin. His gaze became so intense that I couldn't look away, as if I were chained. The room felt smaller and smaller, and the air seemed to thicken from the tension. His hand finally rested on mine, and I froze, unable to push it away or accept it. The thin line between fear and desire blurred with every second, and I knew that in a moment, we would both cross that line of no return. He didn't pull his hand away, instead he squeezed my palm tighter, and I heard my heart beat faster, thumping in my temples. His voice was almost a whisper, but in that silence it was louder than any scream. The words he spoke seemed to slice through the space between us, and I knew it was impossible to step back. The look in his eyes became softer, but at the same time more dangerous, and I caught myself thinking that I was waiting for this move, afraid of it and wanting it at the same time. At that moment, the entire world narrowed to this tense moment, when the past lost its meaning and the future hadn't yet begun. He came so close that I could feel his breath on my cheek, and in that instant, everything felt forbidden but impossibly desirable. His hand slid higher up my forearm, and the touch felt like it was scorching my skin. I wanted to pull away, but my feet felt rooted to the floor, and my heart pulled me forward more strongly than my mind held me back. I heard a quiet creak of a door somewhere in the hallway, and that sudden little sound only intensified the tension. We both froze, knowing that in another second someone might walk in. But he didn't let go of me. Instead, his fingers squeezed tighter, as if he was afraid of losing this moment. He slowly leaned closer, as if checking if I would dare to pull away. But I stood motionless, my breathing growing heavier. His gaze slid to my lips, and everything inside me tightened like a string about to snap. I heard a faint sound behind the wall, as if someone was moving through the house, but we no longer cared. This moment was pulling us into our own world. His palm was trembling on my hand, but his grip held firm, and I felt him struggling with himself just as I was. In that silence, we both understood that the boundary had almost disappeared, and a step back was no longer possible. His breath was scorching my cheek. He stood so close that I could feel every movement of his chest, every heartbeat. My hand instinctively slid over his, and in that moment, a spark seemed to ignite between us, shattering the familiar calm of the house. The room fell silent. Only the chirping of crickets outside and the rustling wind could be heard. I looked into his eyes and knew that words weren't needed now. Everything had already been said by this silence, this tension that grew with every second. I felt that in a moment we would both be unable to stop. His fingers trembled slightly, as if they had accidentally brushed against my hand, but that accident lasted too long to be true. I held my breath. My heart was beating so hard that it felt like he could hear it. We both stood motionless, but everything was already happening between us. Tension, anticipation, temptation. I felt the warmth of his skin, and it seemed to pull me closer. Although my mind was screaming, "Stop!" my body responded differently. Every movement, every look, said that we had crossed a line beyond which there would no longer be ordinary family silence. He seemed to sense my anxiety and turned his head slightly. His gaze lingered on me longer than usual, and in his eyes, I could read what we were both afraid to say out loud. His breathing was heavy but measured, as if he were holding himself back with all his might. I didn't move either, but every cell in my body longed for this forbidden move, as if the space itself was pushing us closer. The silence was broken only by the sound of the clock on the wall, ticking off the seconds in which everything was changing. He clenched his fist slightly, as if fighting with himself, and stepped closer. I felt the air between us become thicker, warm, and anxious, as if electricity was spreading through the room. His hand accidentally, or not so accidentally, touched mine, and a shiver ran through my body from that light touch. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. His eyes held me, not letting me escape. Everything around us seemed to disappear, and only we remained, our breathing, and this dangerous attraction that couldn't be stopped. He leaned a little closer, and I felt his breath on my cheek. Too close, too risky, but in that moment I didn't pull away. His fingers slid over my hand, lingering for a moment longer than a simple accident would allow. Everything inside me mixed together. Anxiety, excitement, a strange feeling of anticipation. It seemed that if we took one more step, the road back would disappear forever. I gave a slight tug on my hand as if to pull away, but he held it gently, not allowing me to take that step back. His gaze was direct, persistent, and it said more than words ever could. I felt the silence around us grow heavier, as if the whole house had frozen, leaving us alone in this moment. My heart was beating faster and faster, and at one point, I realized that in another second, the boundary would be crossed, even by a random gesture or a careless word. I froze, feeling his breath get closer, warm and enveloping. His gaze lingered on my face, a little lower on my lips, and everything inside me tightened. I couldn't tell what was stronger, the desire to leave or to stay, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. His fingers slid almost imperceptibly over my hand, and that simple movement felt like an electric shock. There was a complete silence in the house. Only the clock on the wall was lazily counting the seconds, and for me, each one stretched into an eternity. His fingers tightened on my hand, as if he was checking if I would push him away. But I didn't take a step back. I just stood there, feeling my heart pounding in my chest so loudly that it seemed like the whole house could hear it. He leaned closer so I could smell his cologne mixed with something domestic and familiar, and that was even more confusing. His gaze slid over my face, lingering on my eyes, then on my lips. I caught myself looking back too intently for too long and unable to look away. At that moment, a floorboard in the hallway quietly creaked, and I flinched as if we might be caught. But he didn't pull away. He only pressed my palm a little tighter against his chest, and I felt the rhythm of his heart. It was beating just as fast as mine. He seemed to understand my tension and smiled slightly with the corner of his lips, but his eyes remained serious. His breath was scorching my cheek as he slowly, unhurriedly, ran his thumb over my fingers, as if checking if I would let him continue. The house was quiet, with only the ticking of the clock in the living room and the distant hum of a TV that someone had forgotten to turn off. In that silence, any movement seemed too loud, but we still stood close and I didn't pull away. His gaze lingered on my lips, and I felt my knees tremble, because in that moment, I clearly understood that he also felt this invisible thread between us, thin but so strong that it was impossible to break away. I felt everything in my chest tighten and tried to take a step back, but he subtly squeezed my fingers tighter, as if he didn't want to let go. His gaze became deeper, heavier, and a strange fire ignited within me. I heard a car rush by outside, a door creak somewhere, but it all seemed distant and unimportant. We were standing too close and I could clearly feel his warmth, his breath, his scent. My heart was beating so loudly that it seemed like he could hear it too. And in that moment I suddenly realized that if I didn't stop this now, it would be too late. I felt his hand tremble, as if he himself was fighting with something inside. His gaze became softer, and that only confused me more. I wanted to break free, but my feet felt glued to the floor. My breathing hitched, and the words got stuck in my throat. He leaned a little closer, and I heard his low voice, almost a whisper, that sent shivers down my skin. In that instant, I clearly understood that we had already gone too far, and there was no turning back. I felt him get even closer. His breath slid across my cheek, and everything inside me turned upside down. It was as if he was waiting for me to take a step myself. Just one, a very small one. But I stood there, clenching my fingers, not knowing what to do. The room was quiet. Only the clock on the wall was counting the seconds, each one becoming excruciatingly long. His hand rested on my shoulder. Carefully, almost weightlessly. But that touch was enough for the world around us to disappear and for only us to remain. I froze, feeling his palm squeeze my shoulder tighter, and for a second it felt like I was drowning in his gaze. Everything inside me was mixed together. Fear, excitement, desire, and I didn't know where to go from this growing tension. He leaned a little closer, and even the slight rustle of his movement made my heart beat faster, as if it was about to burst from my chest. The room was still quiet, and it was this silence that made every moment even more unbearable, as if fate itself was waiting for us to decide what would happen next. He took a step back as if fighting with himself. But in his eyes I already read the answer, the very one I feared and longed for at the same time. In that moment, our entire home, with its daily worries and familiar routine, ceased to exist. There were only us in this tension, stretched as tight as a string. I felt that the choice had been made, that neither he nor I could step back, and that something we didn't even dare to think about out loud was waiting for us.